This was something that happened to my best friend and me back in high school. It was around 2008 in a small town in upstate Pennsylvania. We met in 3rd grade and have been close ever since. We're about 28 now. Let me give you some background. My friend, C, and I hit it off instantly when we met in elementary school, and we were practically inseparable. We spent so much time at each other's houses that her mom even set up a spare room just for me. I had everything there, clothes, toys, even pictures on the walls. Her mom, Diane, always wanted 2 daughters and treated me like I was her own. Now, on to what happened. This took place when C and I were in our sophomore year of high school. Diane had been divorced for a while and had tried dating different men, some of whom she met online through dating sites like Match.com. She had been talking to a man for a few weeks and was excited about him. She always made sure to get our opinions before meeting someone in person. She called us into her room one evening to show us his profile. The profile itself was pretty plain, as you'd expect for a middle-aged man in 2008 on a dating site. His bio mentioned his work with metal, his passion for craftsmanship, and how his job in a foundry kept him grounded. There was something about his wording that gave me an odd feeling. He had dark, neatly groomed hair, a well-kept beard, a chiseled jawline, and piercing blue eyes. For a guy in his 40s, he was in decent shape, but I still told Diane he seemed a little off. C joked that her mom always found the most awkward guys, and we all laughed about it. She decided to go ahead with the date anyway. Since he lived about 2 hours away, he was driving to our town, and they planned to take one car into the city. C and I helped Diane pick out an outfit, did her makeup, and then went upstairs to give her space before her date. We were painting her bedroom wall, listening to music, and chatting when something terrifying happened. He let himself in. No knock, no doorbell. The dogs didn't bark. We had no idea how long he had been in the house before we heard a deep, gravelly voice behind us. Well, didn't know I was getting a 2-for-1 deal. We jumped, our hearts nearly stopping. He chuckled and slowly walked toward us, completely casual. The strong scent of cigarettes filled the room. Felt like we were in some eerie horror scene. That's when I realized he looked like the guy from the pictures, but not quite. His hair was streaked with gray instead of solid black, and his eyes weren't blue. They were so dark they almost looked entirely black. I was about to say something when Diane's voice called from downstairs. Who got hurt? She must have thought we were roughhousing like usual. When she reached the top of the stairs, she stopped cold, startled to see a strange man standing between her and us. He turned to her with an exaggerated smile and said, "Diane, you look gorgeous." I knocked, but no one answered. Hope it's okay that I let myself in. These your girls? Beautiful, just like their mother. When he said mother, something about it felt unsettling. C and I exchanged uneasy glances and stepped off our ladders. Diane immediately sensed our discomfort. Forcing a polite smile, she said, "Next time, just ring the bell and I'll get the door." He nodded and stepped forward, hugging her as if they were old friends. She rolled her eyes at us behind his back. Then she led him downstairs, where we overheard him apologizing repeatedly. C and I rushed to text Diane about what he had said to us, hoping she'd see it discreetly. About 10 minutes later, she came upstairs, closed the door, and hugged us. She apologized for how uncomfortable he made us and said he probably didn't mean any harm. He had told her that we reminded him of his own daughters. Then, she told us they were heading out for their date. We wished her a safe night, though C and I couldn't shake our unease. About 15 minutes later, we heard them heading out. Diane called up to say she loved us, and we yelled back that we loved her too. As soon as the door shut, we started talking over each other about how strange he was. "Did you see his eyes?" C said. "He looks so much like the guy in the pictures, but not exactly." We agreed that something about him felt off. His scent, his demeanor, his voice. It was like something straight out of a stranger danger warning. Diane texted us hourly to assure us she was fine. But then, around midnight, she sent a final message. "I'm okay, but officially freaked out. Coming home now." We were pacing, nerves on edge, until we saw headlights pull into the driveway. She arrived much faster than expected, practically jumping out of the truck before it had fully stopped. She gave the driver a quick wave and hurried inside, locking the door behind her. "Let's keep the lights off and go upstairs," she whispered. We followed her up to C's room, where we watched out the window. The truck was still in the driveway, engine running. As Diane spilled the story, our stomachs turned. He had claimed he made dinner reservations at the wrong place, so he suggested getting takeout and having a picnic. Diane wasn't thrilled with the idea but felt bad since he had driven so far. Then he offered to cook for her at his vacation home nearby. She hesitated but ultimately agreed. The house was a secluded log cabin about 40 minutes away. The moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong. He kept making odd comments about how easy it was to get her alone and how he liked strong mothers because they had more fight in them. Diane realized this wasn't the man she thought he was. And then he started asking about us, what we were like, what kind of trouble we got into, what punishments we received as kids. Terrified her. She feigned feeling sick and asked for a ride home. He was visibly unhappy but eventually agreed. But before leaving, he searched for his keys, pretending he had misplaced them, though she was certain she saw them in his pocket. When she offered to call someone to pick her up, he suddenly found them. As they walked to the truck, she noticed a detached garage with another vehicle, the same one now sitting in our driveway. On the way back, he kept showing her pictures of us on his phone, photos he had taken from Diane's social media. Then he asked, "Would you sacrifice yourself for one of your girls?" She was too horrified to answer. He just laughed. As she finished telling us this, we saw his truck's headlights turn off. Without hesitation, Diane called the sheriff. Being a small town, he lived just a few houses down and arrived within minutes. The man, realizing he was caught, panicked. He threw something, a duffel bag, into the truck and tried to escape. When he saw he was blocked, he tore through our yard, speeding off into the night. We never found out if they caught him. For weeks, we were paranoid, wondering if he had done something in the house while he was inside. Did he set up cameras? Did he tamper with anything? We never knew. We did get eerie messages on social media for months after, some of which we were sure came from him. Then one day they stopped. Even now, years later, we hope never to cross paths with that man again. I was about 7 years old when my dad decided we should take a weekend trip to a cabin in the mountains. He thought it would be a great way for us to spend time together as a family, away from the distractions of daily life. My mom loved the idea, so we packed up the car, my parents, my older sister, and me, and set off early on a chilly Friday morning. The drive was long and winding, cutting through frosty hills and quiet countryside. When we arrived, the cold hit me right away. The air was sharp, almost biting, and a thin layer of snow already covered the ground. It made sense with winter just around the corner. We unloaded our bags, settled into the warm wooden cabin, and picked our sleeping spots. After a cozy dinner by the crackling fireplace, we went to bed, eager to explore the woods the next day. That night, something strange happened. I was lying in bed when I heard noises outside, footsteps crunching through the frost. Curious, I peeked out the window but saw only the dark shapes of trees swaying in the wind. I told myself it was just an animal and tried to sleep, but the footsteps returned about 15 minutes later. This time, I woke my sister, who was 11. We both crept to the window and, for a brief moment, saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the trees. We couldn't make out any features, just a bulky shape. A shiver ran down my spine. We quickly ducked below the window, whispering nervously, before deciding it was best to ignore it and go back to sleep. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing with possibilities. The next morning, I woke to the comforting smell of sizzling bacon and the sound of my mom humming in the kitchen. I asked if I could go outside to help my dad, who was already chopping wood nearby. My sister stayed inside, still groggy from our restless night. I ran out and found my dad talking to a man I'd never seen before. He was short and stocky, with a shaved head and a worn-out cap. His cheeks were red, and despite the cold, beads of sweat clung to his forehead. As I walked up, my dad turned to me and said, "This is my son." Introducing me by name, the man gave me a tight-lipped smile. "Nice to meet you, kid. I'm Victor." His gaze lingered on me a little too long. Without thinking, I blurted out, "You look kinda nervous. Are you okay?" Victor coughed awkwardly. Yeah, he said, forcing a grin. "Just some old memories. I was in the service." My dad gave a sympathetic nod, and I didn't question it further, though something about his uneasiness unsettled me. Victor claimed he was staying in a nearby cabin with his family and had come over to introduce himself. My dad was always friendly, so he invited him inside for breakfast. Victor accepted. While we ate, he asked me a lot of questions, what games I liked, what I did for fun. He seemed nice enough, but something still felt off. After breakfast, I went outside to play while my dad continued chopping wood. At one point, I tripped, scraping my knee on a jagged rock. Tears welled up as I looked at the bloody scrape. Almost immediately, Victor appeared beside me. "Come to my cabin. I have bandages," he offered. My dad was inside helping my mom, and I was too young to think twice about it. I nodded and followed Victor into the woods. We walked much farther than I expected. The cold bit at my cheeks, and my knee throbbed. "How much further?" I asked. "Just a little more," he kept saying. After what felt like 20 minutes, we finally reached a small, run-down cabin. It didn't look like the other well-kept rentals we had passed earlier. "Where's your family?" I asked as we stepped inside. Victor avoided the question for a moment. "They're out for a walk," he eventually said. "Come on, let's fix that knee." He knelt beside me, pressing a bandage over the cut. His hand lingered on my leg, rubbing it slowly. "You've got strong legs," he said with a strange smile. A sick feeling rose in my stomach. I stood up abruptly. "I should go back," I mumbled. Victor's smile faded. "No need to rush," he said, stepping in front of the door. "Stay for lunch." My heart pounded. I glanced around for another exit. "My parents will be looking for me," I said. Victor waved a hand. "I told them you're with me." A lie. Just then, the door to a back room creaked open. A pale woman with hollow eyes stepped out. She looked right at me and whispered, "Help me." Victor spun around. "Get back inside," he snapped. The woman flinched and disappeared into the room. He slammed the door shut and turned back to me with an eerie smile. "Don't mind her. She's sick. Now, let's find you some warmer clothes." Terror surged through me. I bolted toward the door, yanked it open, and ran into the forest. Behind me, Victor shouted and gave chase. My heart pounded as I sprinted through the snow, branches whipping my face. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. His heavy footsteps crunched behind me, growing louder as he closed the distance. But then, through the trees, I saw it, our cabin. My dad stood outside, his face alarmed as he saw me barreling toward him. "Victor," I screamed. "He's not a good guy. He tried to keep me there." My dad didn't hesitate. He ran inside, grabbed his axe, and called the police. When the officers arrived, Victor's cabin was empty. They searched inside and found ropes, duct tape, and children's clothes that didn't belong to me. The woman was gone. Victor was gone. The police told us that the cabin hadn't been rented to anyone for months. We packed our bags and left that same day. My dad kept checking the rearview mirror the entire drive home. The police never gave us any updates. We never found out who Victor really was, what happened to that woman, or how he ended up in that cabin. But I still have nightmares about that weekend. Started as just another trip to the mountains. My stepmom, Marie, grew up as a fairly privileged teenager in the late 70s. Her family had moved to the US from Scotland when she was about 10. She attended a well-regarded high school in a charming town, where she befriended Jenna, an unlikely match since Marie's usual crowd was the popular, well-off kids. But she and Jenna hit it off, and Jenna introduced her to outdoor activities like hiking, fishing, and sailing. Marie always had dark circles under her eyes and carried a naturally brooding look, but thanks to Jenna, she started getting into outdoor adventures. One Sunday, they decided to go hiking in the hills about an hour away. Marie put on what were likely her pricey hiking boots, and they drove off to the trails. Jenna parked in an open clearing where some wooden planks marked makeshift parking spots. There were no other cars around, not that they thought much of it at the time. They started hiking up the hill, veering off the designated path because Jenna liked to think of herself as a bit of a rebel. The hike itself wasn't anything special. Marie would later complain about how muggy and full of bugs it was. Once they reached the top, Marie was over it. The pampered side of her started showing, and she groaned until Jenna finally gave in, agreeing to rest before heading back down. They had been descending for about 10 minutes when Marie started whining again. To keep the peace, Jenna suggested they walk along the roadside instead of the rough trail. They probably looked ridiculous, fully geared up for a hike but trudging along a dusty road. Not even 5 minutes later, a truck pulled up next to them. It was an old, rusty thing that looked like it had seen better days. The driver rolled down his window, and the girls peeked in through the passenger side. He had a scruffy beard, a baseball cap pulled low, and long, messy brown hair. He greeted them with a friendly smile and asked if they wanted a lift. Marie thought he was charming, even kind of attractive, but Jenna felt uneasy the moment he spoke. Despite her instincts screaming at her, Marie persuaded her to get in. "It's just a 10-minute ride down to the car at most," she insisted. The girls opened the passenger door, and the guy gestured for them to climb into the back behind the seats. They got in and the truck started moving. That was the moment Jenna realized they had made a huge mistake. The back seat was clean enough, but on the floor behind the driver's seat was a coil of rope. Peeking out from under the passenger seat were several rolls of plastic wrap. It seemed odd, unnerving even, but Jenna didn't want to scare Marie, so she kept quiet. 10 minutes passed, and the woods didn't look any thinner. They hadn't passed a single other car. Jenna asked how much longer it would be, and the driver casually mentioned he was taking an alternate route and needed to stop somewhere first. That was it. They were only 16, and Jenna didn't want to press him too hard, but she was terrified. Sitting behind him, she had a clear view of his hair. It was thick, tangled, and greasy. His collar was crusted with dried mud. She tried to memorize as many details as possible, but the more she noticed, the more panicked she became. He was youngish, strong-looking, and just slightly taller than both of them. He offered no more details, and they didn't ask. Minutes later, they pulled into a clearing where an old log cabin sat. There was a tree stump with an axe lodged in a chunk of wood nearby. Jenna's stomach dropped. The man switched off the engine, got out and said, "Wait here, I'll be right back." Then he disappeared into the cabin. Jenna turned to Marie, whispering that she felt seriously uneasy. But Marie, trying to stay polite, brushed her off. Jenna kept insisting until she finally snapped, demanding that Marie get out of the truck with her. They slipped out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The cabin was about 50 yards away. Why would this guy leave two teenage girls alone in his truck? It didn't make sense. They hesitated, unsure what to do. Marie, raised to be polite and well-mannered, actually considered getting back into the truck so they wouldn't offend him. Jenna was about to yell at her again when she spotted something on the driver's side floorboard. A hatchet. The blade was stained with dried red and brown smears, and it was partially stuck to the floor. Jenna lost it. Marie saw it too and started to panic. At that moment, running was their only option. They bolted into the trees without looking back. They ran blindly, stumbling through the underbrush. Jenna tried to get her bearings and guessed they were heading back toward the parking area. Marie sobbed the whole way. Jenna felt awful but was also terrified that the man might hear them. She kept hushing Marie, urging her to keep going. Finally, they spotted the familiar wooden fence marking the parking lot. Relief flooded them until they noticed something that made their blood run cold. The truck. It was parked at the far edge of the gravel lot, facing the opposite direction. They couldn't see if anyone was inside. Marie wanted to make a run for their car, but Jenna hesitated. She managed to convince Marie to wait. This was the late 70s. No cell phones, no ranger stations nearby, no one around to help. The lot was wide open, and they had no idea what might happen if they made a break for it. So they hid, crouched behind a large tree, concealed by bushes. They waited. Time dragged on. The sun dipped lower. The forest grew noisy with animals stirring in the dusk. Marie fidgeted anxiously, pestering Jenna about leaving. Jenna was just about to give in when they heard a noise. A soft clunk echoed across the lot. They watched in horror as the back door of their car slowly swung open. The bearded man slid out. He stood there for a moment, scanning the woods. Then, without a word, he shut the door and casually walked back to his truck. The engine rumbled to life and he drove away. They waited several more minutes just to be sure, then sprinted to their car. They jumped in, slammed the doors shut, and tore out of there before they even buckled their seatbelts. If that man is still alive today, he'd be well into his senior years. But Marie and Jenna never wanted to see him again. It was late November when it happened. All of this took place over a period of 3 years, starting in 2011. That was the year I moved into a small old house in the countryside. A childhood friend of mine asked if I'd be her roommate, and since I needed to move out of my parents' place while she needed help covering rent, it seemed like a perfect arrangement. The house itself dated back to the 1700s, though the exact year was uncertain. The road it sat on was named after the original family who had owned the land, an old tobacco farming family that once controlled a vast portion of what is now one of the biggest cities in the country. If you search for pictures of early American homes, you'd find plenty that looked just like it. At first, we thought the structure may have been used as slave quarters, but after some research, we realized it had likely been a stable. That theory made sense, especially after our dog dug up an old horseshoe from the yard. I still have it to this day. From the very first night, I sensed something strange. The house had an odd energy. It was full of quirks, like the fact that there were no doors leading to the upstairs or the downstairs bedrooms. My friend's bedroom had been part of a later addition built in the 1980s. The previous owners had also added a small kitchen and bathroom, since the original structure had neither. Now that you have an idea of the place, let me explain why I'm telling this story. Right after moving in, I constantly had the feeling of being watched. The house always felt chilly, dark, and damp, almost like a basement. Sure, that's normal for an old home, but there was something else, something unsettling. It started with scratching. Every night, I'd wake up to the sound of scratching coming from right beneath my bed, near my head. At first, I assumed it was mice, but as I listened closely, I realized it was different. The noise was too deliberate. Long, dragging scrapes followed by silence, then repeating again. I'd pull the blankets over my head, cover my ears, and squeeze my eyes shut. I was 22 at the time, but I felt like a scared little kid. I wasn't about to challenge whatever was making that noise. One night, I was still awake when the scratching began. This time, it started on the opposite side of the room, above my bed. Slowly, it moved down the wall, then underneath me. After some time, it traveled to the far corner of the room, then back again before finally stopping. Here's why I know it wasn't mice. The walls were made of solid logs, the same on the inside as they were on the outside. There was no space between them, no hollow gaps where something could move around. The house was built sturdy and tight. I was so freaked out that I started sleeping downstairs. When my roommate asked why, I told her everything. She admitted she had been hearing the same noises when she was home alone. All of this happened within our first week there. Then things got even weirder. When we moved in, I had to remove several screws from the windows, ones the previous tenant had put there himself. One of the exterior doors had even been screwed shut. While cleaning out the kitchen, we found a bunch of strange pellets in the oven. At first, we assumed it was some kind of animal food, but looking back, I'm not so sure. We also found piles and piles of mail-order catalogs addressed to the former tenant. We joked that he had been a hermit or maybe something even stranger. In hindsight, I don't think we were too far off. After that, my friend and I started sleeping in the living room, hoping that being together would make things feel less eerie. It helped a little until one night, I had a terrifying dream. In the dream, I saw myself sleeping from a third-person view. A dark presence loomed over me, growing closer. As it approached, I felt a crushing pressure in my head, and a piercing, ringing sound filled my ears. The sensation built and built until, suddenly, I jolted awake. At that exact moment, the TV switched off by itself, as if someone had pressed the remote. We'd had issues with the TV before. It would randomly turn on and off, but this time the timing was too perfect to ignore. I knew for a fact I had gone to bed with it off, so why had it been on at all? From then on, we both slept in her room. She told me nothing strange ever happened there. Maybe because it was a newer part of the house, I don't know. Either way, our ghost had a funny way of playing matchmaker because now, years later, she's my wife. We've been married for 5 years and are trying to start a family. One afternoon, I was upstairs reading when my bedroom window started opening and shutting on its own. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the next day I set up the same situation, and it happened again. Funny how it never occurred when I wasn't in the room. By then, I was done playing games. I shouted at whatever was there, told it to leave us alone, that I was sick of it. After that, things quieted down for a bit. But then, when I was home alone, strange things would still happen. The moment my wife left for work, alarm clocks would start going off. Drawers would open by themselves. Someone or something would bang on the front door. Over time, though, the activity slowly faded. I think as I matured, whatever it was lost interest in me. These days, my in-laws live there. They were our landlords, and the house feels completely different now, warm, cozy, inviting. I can spend time there alone without feeling afraid. The cabin is still in the family. My mother-in-law refuses to sell it. I went from being a reckless young guy to taking care of the place. Cleaning gutters, arranging repairs, making sure it stays in good shape. The house gave me so much, and I've grown to love it. When my father-in-law passed, I stayed there alone for a few nights, hoping for a familiar knock or some kind of sign. But nothing happened. The house was silent, peaceful. I don't think the spirit was ever truly malicious. It felt more like an unseen guardian, watching over us. Maybe once my wife and I grew up, it decided its job was done. It always seemed to focus on me more than her, though. Maybe I was more open to it in some way. I've always had a sensitivity to the paranormal. My mother swears she's seen a ghost before, and I think it runs in my family. We never talked about it much, but over time, little stories have surfaced. Most of them are good ones. I guess we come from a line of people who can sense things others can't. That afternoon, I had just gotten back from the gym, grabbed something to eat, and was about to unwind when my buddy called. He asked if I wanted to go for a ride on my motorcycle. Something we did a lot, just cruising around, blasting music and soaking in the good vibes. The weather was perfect, hot, sunny, and clear. So I grabbed my helmet and keys and headed out. At first, we just rode aimlessly, enjoying the heat and jamming to our favorite songs. Eventually, my fuel started running low, so we decided to head back. That's when my friend suddenly pointed at a seemingly ordinary gravel path leading into the woods. We had nothing else to do, so we figured, why not? The trail was steeper than it looked. So steep that my friend had to hop off while I powered the bike up the incline. When we finally reached level ground, I decided to ride ahead a bit to see where the path led. It was mostly a winding dirt road weaving through thick trees. Then, on my left, I noticed something odd. An opening in the trees with fresh tire tracks leading down another trail. Stood out, but I brushed it off and kept going. That's when I saw him. About 10 feet ahead, partially hidden by the bend in the road, a man stood beside a car. He hadn't noticed me yet, but I had a clear view of him. He looked to be in his mid-30s, wearing a black cap and a gray zip-up. Something about him felt off. My first thought was that we had wandered onto private land, but there were no signs, no fences, nothing to indicate we weren't supposed to be there. Still, something in my gut told me to turn around. I rode back to my friend, who was still catching his breath from the steep climb. I told him about the guy, and just as we were debating whether to check out the side trail with the tire tracks, something happened that made our stomachs drop. Headlights. The car was coming toward us, fast. My friend practically jumped onto the back of my bike, and we tore down the hill. As I hit the main road, I glanced in my mirror. The car was still behind us, turned onto the road, following us. My pulse spiked. The guy was tailing us, matching our speed, closing the distance. I took a sharp turn down a smaller road I knew, a shortcut that led to a bike path. When we looked back, the car had stopped, just sitting there, watching. Then, after what felt like forever, it slowly turned and drove away. Alone in the silence, we laughed it off, trying to shake the unease. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe we had overreacted. But later, we looked up the road on satellite images. First, it seemed normal. Then we noticed the houses. Old satellite images showed multiple homes along the road, but one stood out. It looked well kept, freshly mowed lawn, a camper parked outside. But in the most recent images, something was off. Trash was scattered everywhere. Clothes littered the gravel. The place looked abandoned but recently used. Then came the real shocker. When I tried to follow the road further on the map, the image blurred out. The end of the road was completely obscured, like it had been intentionally erased. Couldn't let it go. We had to go back. We weren't planning to return so soon, but curiosity got the best of us. This time, we brought another friend and took a car instead of the bike. And I wish we hadn't. The road felt different. Paths that should have been familiar looked off. But the biggest shock? There was a cabin now. It hadn't been there before, I was sure of it. The last time we were there, that spot was just trees. But this cabin looked old, weathered, like it had been standing for decades. Yet somehow it was still maintained. Then we saw the roadblock, a fresh one. Someone had put up a barrier, blocking the final stretch of the trail. We had no choice but to leave the car behind and continue on foot. The closer we got to the end of the path, the worse the feeling became. I kept glancing over my shoulder, the sensation of being watched growing unbearable. Then we saw it, a plain-looking building, surrounded by a massive fence. Next to it, a camouflaged radio tower loomed over the trees. And then we saw the sign, a government warning. It explicitly stated that taking photos was illegal. I wasn't about to mess with that. We immediately turned around and headed back to the car. But before leaving, we decided to check out the strange cabin. My friend went up to the window while I stayed back, a horrible feeling coiling in my stomach. He only looked inside for a second before his body stiffened. Then, without a word, he bolted. I didn't ask questions. I just ran after him. We jumped into the car, and as I sped away, I finally got him to speak. The inside was staged, he said, like too perfect, too clean. It looked fake. Then he told me the creepiest part. There had been a cup of coffee sitting on the table inside, still steaming. Someone had just been there, and they had been watching us. Later that night, I went back to check the satellite images again, and I noticed something was seriously wrong. One of the houses, the one with the camper and the mowed lawn, was gone. The other two houses were still there, but that one, it had been wiped off the map, as if it had never existed. But I know what I saw, and it wasn't abandoned. I don't know what's going on out there, but it's seriously messed up. My fiancé and I had just moved into a tiny cabin at the foot of a mountain, surrounded by thick forest. It was our first night there. No furniture yet, just an air mattress on the wooden floor. The nearest neighbors lived far down the road, too distant to see or hear from where we were. It felt isolated. I was setting up the air mattress while my fiancé was in the shower when, out of nowhere, the atmosphere around me shifted. A heavy, almost electric charge filled the room, like the air before a thunderstorm. My skin tingled. The hair on my arms stood on end. Before I could react, the air mattress collapsed inward. The edges suctioned flat against the floor while the middle lifted unnaturally, bowing up like something was pulling it. I just stood there, frozen, my mind struggling to process what I was witnessing. Then I felt it. I turned to my right. Floating in the doorway at head height was a glowing orb of blue light, about the size of a soccer ball. But it wasn't a steady glow. It shifted and pulsed, swirling like liquid, almost as if something inside it was multiplying. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on me, and it was completely silent. I have no idea how long I stared, maybe 5 seconds, maybe minutes, but then, suddenly, the orb shot toward me. I threw myself aside, landing hard on the mattress just as the orb passed inches from my head. It didn't stop. Without slowing down, it blasted straight through the closed window and disappeared into the trees. I lay there, my heart pounding, staring at the window. The glass was unbroken, no hole, no crack, nothing. It was as if the orb had never been there at all. I was so shaken I couldn't bring myself to tell my fiancée that night. Instead, I sat there, replaying it over and over in my head. Even now, thinking about it makes my hands tremble. Every night after that, from the woods just east of our cabin, we would hear the most horrifying, blood-curdling screams. They didn't sound like animals. They sounded human, but twisted, distorted, unnatural. I finally got up the courage to ask a man who lived down the road if he had ever heard them. He just shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, probably that homeless lady who stays out there. She's not all there." His casual response made me even more uneasy. Why was a homeless woman screaming like that every single night? And if it really was her, why had no one done anything? Despite everything, I tried to adjust to life at the cabin. In my free time, I liked to pan for gold, and we were lucky enough to have a creek just a short walk from our front door. It was one of the few things I actually enjoyed about the place. One afternoon, I was by the creek, just off the side of a small bridge, sifting through the sand when an old pickup truck rolled up. The driver, a man who looked to be in his late 50s or early 60s, with a weathered face and serious expression, rolled down his window and called out, "You carrying a gun?" I blinked, caught off guard. No, but I've got bear spray." His expression didn't change. "It's not the bears or mountain lions you gotta worry about in these woods." And then he just drove off. I stood there, watching his taillights disappear, a cold feeling settling deep in my gut. Years later, a friend introduced me to a podcast about the paranormal, stories about strange encounters, Bigfoot, and other bizarre phenomena. I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dozens of people had described seeing the exact same kind of orb I had encountered that night. I had always thought stories of creatures like Sasquatch were just myths, old folklore. But now I'm not so sure. We sold that property a few years later, but I still wonder who or what is out there. I've always felt drawn to the forest. There's something unique about how it makes you feel so many opposing things all at once. Rows upon rows of nearly identical tree trunks stretch endlessly before you, each one appearing the same, yet undeniably different. The thick canopy overhead blocks out the sunlight, wrapping you in shadow, creating a hidden world just for you. When I was younger, the forest was where we spent our days. It didn't matter what we did, as long as we were back home before dinner. The hours in between were ours, and they led to some of the most unforgettable moments of my life. But out of all those memories, there's one that has stayed with me more than any other. One day I can still remember as clearly as if it just happened. We had explored every inch of the woods surrounding our neighborhood, or at least we thought we had. None of us really knew how much land the forest covered. It wasn't something we cared about as kids. We simply wandered together, following wherever the day took us. There were certain markers we all recognized. The old oak stump that meant we were 5 minutes from home, the clearing that put us 10 minutes away, the crumbling wooden shack that signaled a 20-minute walk back. We never mapped it out, we just learned over time. That day, we ventured deeper into the woods than usual. No one decided we would, it just happened naturally. We passed all the familiar landmarks, laughing, talking, and running ahead while also taking our time. The trees kept changing, yet everything felt the same until we saw the clearing. All at once, we stopped. The laughter, the chatter, it all died instantly. Something felt wrong. None of us recognized this place. The trees ended abruptly, forming a near-perfect square of open space. But what really caught our attention was the cabin. A small log structure stood in the middle of the clearing, like the rundown shacks we'd seen before, yet completely unfamiliar. This one had been burned almost to the ground. My memory might be exaggerating, but I swear I could still smell the smoke in the air, could almost see the blackened remains still smoldering. We moved toward it without speaking. The front door, what was left of it, hung loose, barely attached. Nobody wanted to be the first to go in alone, but no one wanted to be the one to stay behind either. The porch groaned under our weight as we stepped closer. Every instinct told me to turn around and leave, but none of us did. I kicked the door, and it crumbled inward like dried leaves. "Hello!" My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Silence. Only the thick, choking smell of burnt wood remained. Inside, everything was charred. A bookshelf, a fireplace, a rocking chair with half its frame missing. Then we heard it, a dull, heavy thump. We froze, scanning the dark interior, but saw nothing. Another thump. This time, we exchanged glances. No one was joking anymore. A third, louder hit followed by movement. The floor had a square cut into it like a trapdoor. A rusted lock clung to one side, hinges on the other, and it was shifting. The entire thing lifted slightly, dust and ash floating in the air. The lock strained against the force beneath it. Another impact, harder this time. We stood rooted in place, staring. The trapdoor wasn't just moving now. It was bending. Something underneath was trying to break free. For the briefest moment, I saw it. A single, wild eye staring up through the crack. I don't remember making the decision to run. I was just suddenly sprinting. I could hear my friends behind me, ahead of me, feet pounding against the dirt. But I felt something else, too. Something chasing us. I had never outrun any of my friends before that day. But the thought of those eyes and whatever owned them pushed me faster. I passed every single one of them. When we finally reached the old oak stump, we stopped. Hands on our knees, gasping for breath. None of us spoke. None of us wanted to be the first to admit we were terrified. But we all knew. That night, we walked home in silence. No one joked. No one said a word about it. And none of us ever brought it up again. The next day, we went back to playing in the woods. But an unspoken rule had formed. We never went that deep again. And we never broke that rule. Sometimes I think it's better not to know. Even now, looking back with the mind of an adult, I still can't make sense of what happened. I wonder now and then what was down there, what was trying to get out, and how close it was to succeeding. That thought alone still chills me. One night, I was living on the edge of a vast forest reserve in a small, weathered cabin. Calling it remote would be an understatement. The only way in or out was a 4-mile stretch of dirt and gravel road that twisted through dense woods. It was so narrow in places that it felt like driving through a tunnel formed by tangled branches. No streetlights, no neighbors, and no cell service. Just me, the trees, and whatever else lurked in the wild. The cabin itself was basic, no electricity and, worst of all, no way to lock the door. The owner refused to make any modern upgrades to their beloved off-grid retreat. First, I brushed it off. I'd grown up in the countryside and was used to roughing it. My roommate, however, was a city guy interning with the park service. He laughed off my concerns. "What, are the squirrels gonna break in?" he joked. I didn't laugh. It started with noises at night. At first, I assumed it was just animals. After all, we were deep in the woods. But these sounds weren't random rustling or the quick scurrying of small creatures. They were steady, deliberate, slow, heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. At first, I convinced myself it was my imagination. Maybe a deer or a wild hog. But as the nights went on, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The steps would begin far off, moving carefully through the trees, never running, never hurried. Then they would stop, always in the thickest parts of the forest, where I couldn't see past the dense foliage. I'd hold my breath, listening. Sometimes, silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Other times, I swore I could hear breathing. Not the quick, nervous breaths of a deer or the snort of a boar. Something deeper, heavier. Then nothing. Minutes would pass, maybe an hour. Just when I started to think I'd imagined it, the footsteps would start again, this time closer. The unease settled deep in my bones. It wasn't just the sounds. It was the feeling, that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, that gut instinct that tells you someone is watching. Even in daylight, the once tranquil wilderness now felt suffocating. The trees seemed taller, their shadows stretching longer. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, and the cabin's door didn't lock. That thought consumed me as the nights dragged on. What if it wasn't an animal? What if it wasn't in my head? What if one night, whatever was out there decided to come inside? I started sleeping in my car. It wasn't much, but it felt safer. A false sense of security, maybe, but it was better than nothing. I parked more than an acre away from the cabin, hoping the distance would help. Didn't. The footsteps still came. The breaking point came on a night I'll never forget. It was past midnight. I was in the driver's seat, reclined, a blanket pulled up to my chest. Then I heard it, those slow, steady steps through the leaves. But this time, they didn't stop at the tree line. They kept coming. I sat up, barely breathing. The night was pitch black, the forest an endless void beyond my windshield. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. A single twig snapped. Then, just outside my car, a long, wheezing breath. My hands shook as I fumbled for my keys, nearly dropping them. I turned the ignition, headlights flaring to life, revealing nothing. I slammed the car into reverse and sped out of there without looking back. By morning, I packed my things and left for good. My roommate stayed behind, convinced I'd lost my mind. But he didn't last long. Less than a month later, he called me. He'd been robbed twice. After the second time, he set up motion sensor cameras around the property. What they captured made my stomach drop. A man, his hair long and unkempt, had been out there the whole time, hiding, watching us, watching me. The old cabin had seen far better days. The closest town was a long, empty drive away, a stretch of twisting roads that seemed to erase any trace of civilization. No one passed through unless they had a real reason to, and out here there weren't many good ones. From the moment I moved in, something felt off. The solar battery barely functioned, so I spent most nights in complete darkness, aside from my weak headlamp and the occasional sliver of moonlight. The nights felt endless, restless, and suffocating. At first, it was the bats that kept me up, dozens of them fluttering in the rafters, their tiny claws scratching and their sharp screeches making sleep impossible. Then came something else, something heavier. Footsteps on the deck. The first time I heard them, I told myself it had to be an animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox. But deep down, I knew better. Raccoons don't walk with slow, deliberate steps, and they don't pause like they're listening or waiting. After 2 months, the scratching started. First at the edges of the porch, then closer to the door. Something was testing the cabin. Every time I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, the towering trees pressing in like they were hiding something just out of view. I started keeping my rifle close, even though I technically wasn't supposed to have one. But tell me, who the hell lives out here alone and doesn't arm themselves? Tuesday nights were my grocery run, the only time I left after dark. The drive back was always nerve-wracking, my headlights barely cutting through the suffocating blackness of the forest. But this night was different. I felt it before I even pulled in. A wrongness settled deep in my stomach, a silent warning that something was waiting for me. I stepped out, keys in hand. Then I saw them. 2 eyes. They hovered in the darkness above my front door. Too high for a coyote, too low for a deer. About 4 feet up, motionless, my breath caught in my throat, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to get back in the car. I yelled, told it to get the hell out of here. The eyes didn't move. Then slowly they lowered and started creeping toward me. I grabbed a piece of firewood from the pile and hurled it. The log hit the ground with a heavy thud, and the thing flinched back, but made no sound. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, nearly dropping them. The solar power was out again, leaving me blind in the dark, and I could hear it breathing slow, measured, too controlled for an animal, too knowing. I finally got inside and grabbed my rifle. When I stepped back out, it was still there, but closer now, just at the edge of my dim headlamp's glow. My pulse hammered as I loaded the gun, never looking away. One-handed, I threw another log. This time, it moved, slowly, then melted back into the brush. No sound, no rush of movement, just gone. That night, I downed 4 beers and slept with my rifle in my arms. By morning, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, until the trail crew arrived. They found mountain lion tracks everywhere, covering the porch by the old rocking chair, circling the entire cabin. But here's the thing. After that night, I kept hearing it. The creak of the rocking chair in the dead of night. Footsteps on the deck. I grab my rifle, throw the door open, nothing. No movement, no sound. And when I checked the ground, no tracks. It had been raining for weeks. There should have been tracks. I've been watched by mountain lions before. They stay hidden, keep their distance. They don't taunt you. They don't play games. But something out there was. And whatever it was playing with me. When I was 6 years old, my dad, Robert, took my older brother, Daniel, and me on a week-long trip to a secluded cabin deep in the Scottish countryside. We also brought along our ginger cat, Milo. The cabin was small but cozy, surrounded by dense forest and miles from the nearest town. The bedrooms were upstairs, and mine was the farthest from the others, positioned right where the woods began. A single window sat next to my bed, offering an unsettling view of a twisted old oak tree that I had tried and failed to climb the day before. There were no curtains or blinds to block out the outside world. One night, feeling homesick and restless, I lay in bed with Milo curled up beside me, flipping through a comic book by flashlight. At around 1 a.m, I heard a faint tapping at the window. At first, I assumed it was just a tree branch swaying in the wind, but then the tapping became rhythmic, too precise, like someone knocking with their knuckles. Then a whisper, "Let me in, kid." "It's me, Dad," a voice murmured from the other side of the glass. My blood ran cold. I knew that wasn't my father. I wanted to scream, but the fear held me frozen. "Come on, Jamie, open up." The voice continued, softer now. "It's freezing out here. Just let me in for a hug." I gripped Milo tightly, his fur bristling under my fingers. He let out a low, angry hiss, staring at the window with wide eyes. I buried my face in his fur, praying whoever was out there would go away. Then came the sound that still haunts me, a long, sharp screech. I turned my head slightly and saw him. The man outside was smiling, an unnatural, stretched grin. His eyes gleamed with something sinister as he dragged the tip of a pocket knife across the glass, producing that awful sound. I finally found my voice and screamed. The man's grin twisted into a look of rage and surprise. His gaze flickered toward the door just as my father burst in, gripping his old shotgun. My brother was right behind him, clutching a wooden bat. The stranger's face paled. He stumbled back, and I heard the heavy thud of his boots hitting the ground below. My father rushed to the window just in time to see his shadowy figure vanish into the trees. None of us slept that night. My father sat by the window, his hunting knife in hand, while my brother stayed close, gripping my shoulder. By morning, the police arrived. They found deep scratches on the window pane and footprints in the frost beneath it. They promised to patrol the area, but we packed up and left that very day, never to return. The man was never found. Even now, I remember his voice, calm yet coaxing, like a snake luring its prey. I still hear those footsteps crunching in the snow, still remember the way he called my name. Milo, now 13 and just as feisty, remains my hero. He never stopped hissing until the stranger was gone. And I've never stopped triple-checking that my windows are locked at night.